Nothing in this universe is equal to each other. This is a fact of nature. This is the fundamental fact of nature. So when you force equality, guess what you do? You bring down civilization. You are forcing equality. It is by definition a force. When you have individualism, when you have inequality in the society, that society is civilized. And when you have collectivism in the society, guess what the society is? That society is uncivilized. A civilization must uphold inequality, must uphold individualism. Hello everyone, welcome back. So today we'll be talking about how can you create a peaceful civilization. Like we are doing a series of talks based on one of the comments by Dr. Jordan Peterson, where he mentioned that the highest purpose of life is to make peace, which I very humbly disagree with.
Is there an ultimate purpose of life?
Yeah, sure.
What is it?
What we're doing here.
Which is what?
Hopefully trying to make peace.
Is that enough?
We'll see.
Yeah. Because if...
It's better than the alternative.
What's the alternative?
Hell.
My observation, again, I came across these ideas from Swami Vivekananda, my intellectual master, and of course, the philosophy of Hinduism. According to Hinduism, the highest purpose of life is obviously freedom and not peace. But even if you do want to create a peaceful society, there are some very tough challenges that we have to face with the current understanding of civilization. So today, we will talk about those challenges. And as you can understand, I'll be very critical of Judeo-Christian philosophies. So if you are a staunch supporter of this Judeo-Christian philosophy, you might find this video very disturbing. Okay, so if that is the case, this is the right time to stop this video and move on. And those who want to stick around, thank you very much for joining this conversation, and I'm looking forward to receive your criticism as well. So without further ado, let's dive in. Now, as we are discussing this notion of inequality, discrimination, let's talk a little bit about the caste system, because guess what? These notions need further explanation. Okay. Why these things are important? Because see, when we are talking about caste system, we know that this is superstition. Or at least that's what we are told by the so-called enlightened people. We are told that these things are barbaric, these things are vicious, these things are superstitious. That's what we are being told. But what the people doesn't question is this, that is this student ready? Is this student prepared to receive education? We talked about caste system, that what is the basis of this discrimination caste system, that somebody should be given knowledge and somebody shouldn't be given knowledge. So the obvious question is why? One of the answer can be that is the student ready? Is the student prepared to receive knowledge? Because guess what? Knowledge is power. And it certainly can be a very dangerous thing. To understand the context, I have to take you back to the ancient Indian times, like how knowledge was given back then. Nowadays, knowledge has become a commodity. But this is not how knowledge used to be distributed in the ancient times in India. Knowledge used to be sacred. Okay, there are temple priests, like there are gurus, like these are the master. Students used to live in the Guru Griha, the house of the master, and the master used to decide whether the disciple, the Shishya, the student, is actually ready to receive knowledge. Nowadays, you go to a college or a university, you pay for the tuition fee and you get a degree. It is like a service that you are paying for. It's like buying a cup of coffee. You go to a coffee shop, you pay $5 and then they give you a cup of coffee. But this is not how knowledge used to be given back in India in the ancient times. Like knowledge used to be for free. Knowledge is not something that is paid for. Right now you are paying for a service. You are paying for a service and you are being provided with the service. But that is not how knowledge used to be given. There was this notion of holiness, respect and veneration and all those things which have been completely decoupled in the modern times. So the student will be living in the Guru Griha, in the house of the master, and then the master will decide whether the student is ready to receive knowledge. This is the basis of caste system. It is not about just simply superstition or discrimination. If that is the case, let's say for instance, my intellectual master, Swami Vivekananda, he was born as Sudra. Narendra Datta, he was born as a Sudra, a Dalit, an untouchable, so to speak, in modern terms. Then how come a Dalit became a Yogi? But Brahmins are supposed to become Yogi, not Dalits. Or at least that's what the enlightened people tells us. It doesn't make any sense, does it? And then the other thing we used to keep here, the Brahmins were the one who used to oppress everyone else. Right? They stole the scriptures, they oppressed everyone else. If that is the case, then you look at the example of Rama. He killed Ravana. Who was Ravana? Ravana was a fervent devotee. He was a Brahmin. He was a yogi. He was a fervent devotee of Lord Shiva. To please Lord Shiva, he used to have 10 heads and he used to cut off one of his head and gave it as an anjali, as a sacrifice to Lord Shiva to please him. So these things doesn't really necessarily make any sense. Like if you think about the prevailing narrative that Brahmins used to, they are the oppressor, they used to oppress everyone. If that is the case, then why Rama killed Ravana? Like if you want to put those things into context, let's talk about Prophet Muhammad, the perfect human. Who was Muhammad? Again, if you are honest about Muhammad, who was Muhammad? He was the worst criminal of history, one of the most, if not the most, he is definitely one of the most worst criminal of history. He did some of the most egregious, most vicious, most violent, most depraved, most sadistic things that you can imagine, or even if you can't imagine. Muhammad did all of those things in the name of Allah. He raped, butchered, murdered completely innocent civilians, in the most sadistic, in the most barbaric, in the most unimaginable way possible. And what did Allah did to Muhammad? Nothing. Muhammad did all of these sadistic things in the name of Allah, in the name of his God. What did God do about it? Nothing. God gave him a clean cheat. That you go and murder people, I don't care. But then again, you look at Ravana. What was Ravana's fault? Ravana abducted Rama's wife. And guess what Rama did? He killed his own devotee. Rama, the God incarnate, killed his own devotee. So these things necessarily doesn't make any sense, that if there is a Brahmin, Brahmins are the one who are oppressing everyone, then how come Rama killed Ravana? Ravana was a Brahmin. It doesn't make any sense, and it doesn't also make any sense when it comes to Dalit being an yogi, Vivekananda. So look, my argument is, you may say this is a superstition, you may say that these things are completely, barbaric, vicious, discriminatory and all those things, but my understanding is you shouldn't be taking these things as superstition, because what the Indian philosophers figured out, as we discussed about the notion of divine vision, the notion of freedom, time, space and causation, these things even doesn't apply. That you can transcend all of these boundaries when these people are talking about those things. Do you honestly believe that you are qualified to talk about yet another foundational principle of that civilization? The civilization of Bharat, the Hinduism. Do you honestly believe that you are qualified to talk about caste system? Look, I'm not trying to insult everyone's wisdom or anything, but you shouldn't be taking these things completely as a superstition. That will lead you to nowhere, okay? That is my point. So instead of being biased about your own views, instead of being self-righteous about these things, you should take into these things and see if you can understand how those people looked at the world. Okay, definitely my understanding is they knew a lot more than we know at this point. So that's about an overview of the entire system. But now let's dissect this caste system. Okay, so far we covered about two different notions. We covered about the sacredness of knowledge, and also we covered about the preparation for knowledge. Now these two notions are very, very key in our understanding of civilization, which we will get to in a minute, okay? But now let's shift our focus to a different notion. Individualism versus collectivism. We are talking about inequality and of course equality. Individualism is inequality. And what is collectivism? Collectivism is equality. Like, what is actually civilization? Civilization is to reach an individual's full potential. If you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the psychologist Abraham Maslow, what is at the top of the pyramid? Self-actualization. Like, if you cut the jargon, what is this self-actualization? Self-actualization means that you have reached your full potential. As an individual, you are on your own journey to reach your full potential. Journey of a Pashu to Pashupati. What is Hinduism is all about? Hinduism is about this journey. Journey of a Pashu to Pashupati. Again, we discussed all of these things in the previous episodes as well, okay? You are going through this cycle of life and death until you reach perfection. Until you reach freedom. Journey of an animal, a Pashu to Pashupati. Pashu, animal. Pashupati, Lord Shiva. You are on your journey to Lord Shiva. This journey, this self-actualization, this reaching of the highest potential is called civilization. Now the problem is, what are the roadblocks along the way? Along your journey to reach perfection, to reach your full potential. That's where the second notion comes along. Collectivism. You are on your own journey. Along the way, if there is a roadblock, you will not be able to reach your full potential. So what are the roadblocks in your journey? The roadblocks is this collectivism. Because collectivism has to be created, has to be forced. Roadblock is this equality, is this collectivism. Wherever there is a collectivism in the society, that society has a roadblock. So what is the challenge of a civilization? The challenge of a civilization is to remove this roadblock, is to remove this collectivism. See, there is nothing in this world which is equal to each other. Nothing. Even two chairs that comes out of the same machine, they are not equal. The bricks, the blocks of bricks that are just behind me, there are many of them in one place. None of them are equal. Although obviously they were made by the same mold. Nothing in this universe is equal to each other. This is a fact of nature. This is the fundamental fact of nature. So when you force equality, guess what you do? You bring down civilization. You are forcing equality. It is by definition a force. By definition, it is a force that goes against nature. And this force is by definition tyranny. Nature does not support equality. So if you have to create equality, that means you have to force equality. that is by definition a force. And that is how you destroy civilization. This is the roadblock in your path to perfection, in your path to self-actualization, in your path to reaching full potential. When you have individualism, when you have inequality in the society, that society is civilized. And when you have collectivism in the society, guess what the society is? That society is uncivilized. A civilization must uphold inequality, must uphold individualism. Now the question is how all of these things fit into the caste system. Now what Hindus are saying that, see, if you have to reach your full potential, and that can only be done by acquiring knowledge. And these knowledge need preparation. These knowledge needs certain environment. An environment has grave consequences. This is what the Hindus are saying, that environment can generate suggestions. The environment that you are in right now, this environment can generate suggestions. The suggestions that will be translated into thought in your brain. And these thoughts will lead to action. What is the seed of action? Thought. And where does these thoughts come from? These thoughts mostly originated in the environment. Let's say, for instance, there is a snake right in front of me. Will I be sitting down and talking to you? No, because of the environment. If there is a thunderstorm, if there is a surge, if there is a bomb exploding somewhere, if there is a foul smell coming, if there is a fire, if there are smoke, there are many elements in this environment. All of these elements are constantly affecting our brain. So Hindus are saying that if you have to practice knowledge, it has to be done in a certain environment. The sacredness of knowledge, these ideas have been completely missed, have been completely neglected by the so-called Enlightenment philosophers. They completely failed to grasp this idea. Under democracy, what do you have? You have the separation of church and state. Again, we will come back to this notion when we'll be discussing democracy. There are other problems too, which we will discuss then. But one of the foundational problems of this separation of church and state is this, that you have separated sacredness from the society. Who gave the world temples? Like when you look at the Indian philosophy, how did India build all these temples? And the most important question is, why did they build these temples? Temple is a place of sacredness, if anything else. It has this deity, it has this incense, it has these flowers. You have to take the shoes outside of the temple before you even enter. So this is a place of sacredness. And this idea of sacredness was flourished with the spread of temples, with the building of different temples in almost all over India. Temples, these were the places where knowledge was practiced. We are talking about environment. Like in the last couple of episodes, we talked about when we were discussing that how do you uphold civilization. We talked about that suppressing of the negative tendencies and uplifting of the positive tendencies is the way to uphold civilization, arousing of the Kundalini. But there is the second part. The second part is the environment. To uphold this civilization, to suppress these negative tendencies and to uphold these positive tendencies, you also need an environment. Let's say, for instance, you want to eat something. Can you eat in a toilet? If not, why not? Because this is not the right environment. If you want to eat, you want to go to a kitchen. Okay. and you want to make sure that there are no foul smelling coming from anywhere. You make your place nice and beautiful and warm and cozy because it gives you mental satisfaction, it gives you comfort. If I put you, let's say, under the scorching sun, would you be able to, focus on something? If not, why not? Because this is not the right environment. This notion of environment is key in understanding of civilization. And Indian philosophers, they are the only one who actually figured out, not only that they figured out, but they implemented a system that knowledge should only be practiced in a sacred environment. This is where the notion of temple coming along. This idea of sacredness have been completely butchered, have been completely misunderstood, have been completely ignored in the entire Western discourse of civilization. Entire discourse. And I think it is a grave mistake. It is a grave mistake. So when these Indian philosophers are saying that we have to implement caste system, that some people should be given knowledge and some people shouldn't be given knowledge, what was the underlying philosophy behind it? The underlying philosophy is the environment. See, some people are stupid. They cannot learn. We are not born with the same mental capabilities. We are born with different mental aptitude. Okay? And to run a civilization, to create a civilization, we need basically 4 types of people. We need the brain. Okay, we need the scientists. We need philosophers. In the ancient times in India, these people were called rishis or sages. Okay, these are the scientists in modern term. So this was the first type of people. And you have the second type of people. You need the muscle. If you have something of value, you have to guard it. You need a watchdog to protect your valuables. This is the reason why nowadays we are talking about borders. Open borders, it comes with lots of challenges. But anyway, so you need the second type of people who can guard your valuables. So these are the 2 types of people. And then of course you need money. You need the entrepreneurs, you need the businessmen to run the country. These are the third category of people. Businessmen. Men with the money. And then finally you have the 4th type of people. Some of them who will be working in these businesses. Okay, the businesses that are managed by the 3rd type of people, the businessmen. These are the people, let's say, the artisans, the craftsmen, anything and everything that the businesses need to perform a task. So these people will be assisting those businesses. So these are the 4 different types of people that you will need to create a civilization. And in the last category, you will have some people who will not be able to learn because they have very low IQ. They have very low mental aptitude. They will not be able to learn. And also, there are people who will be necessary to perform the menial task. Because if you create an open market, in an open market, people with the higher caliber will move up the ladder. And people naturally with the lower caliber will fall behind. Like this is just an open market principle. It's not that a new revelation coming along. So people who are at the lowest echelon of this hierarchy, Indian philosophers are saying that, oh look, these people doesn't need actually knowledge. Let's say for instance, they need some expertise, but they are not necessarily required for the purpose of knowledge. And also the fact that knowledge requires particular environment. Just the example that I gave you, can you eat in a toilet? You can't. So to practice knowledge, you need to have the proper environment and also the fact that you need IQ. So if you are lagging in both of these cases, let's say that you perform some menial task, let's say that you are a butcher, let's say for instance you are a toilet cleaner, again with no disrespect, but just putting things bluntly, these jobs doesn't require much talent. Okay. And also the fact that the environment is not conducive to this sacredness. This is where the caste system is coming along, that these people, they do not need knowledge and they are not capable of handling knowledge, and that's why they should not have access to knowledge, that these people should not be allowed to come into the temple. How knowledge used to be given? Knowledge was given in a temple under a priest. But now, because the jobs they are performing, these jobs are menial jobs, they are not clean jobs. These jobs are not necessarily maintaining the right environment for handling knowledge, because knowledge comes with sacredness. Because they are performing this task, they should not be allowed to come to the temple, because temple is a place of sacredness. This is where the caste system comes along. But the problem is here, we are talking about an open market philosophy, that when you have an open market, that's where people naturally tend to find their own place. This is an open market scenario. This is not hereditary. Just because they are performing some menial task doesn't necessarily mean that their sons and daughters will also be performing the same task, will also be barred from the temples. That is not the idea. But at some point people misunderstood these philosophies and they obviously made it birth-based. Again, we are going back from individualism, from open market, now we are going back to collectivism. From individualism, we are now going back to the collectivism. When you have this forced equality in any shape or form, because these people cannot perform these tasks, that means their sons and daughters will also have to be barred from entering the temple. Now you have this forced equality. You see where the problem is, where the challenge is. In any civilization, the biggest challenge of a civilization is to bring down this equality, because equality doesn't exist, and when you force this equality, it is a force by definition. When you force this equality, you actually bring down the civilization, you actually bring down the community. So this is precisely what has happened, because in the open market these people cannot perform the tasks that are required, the mental aptitude that is required to perform certain tasks, they cannot perform those tasks. That means now they have to be employed in one of the areas of the economy, and Indian philosophers are suggesting that look, because knowledge requires sacredness, these environments are not conducive to maintain this sacredness, and as such these people should not have access to education. And then of course their families have also been barred from entering the temple. This forced equality has been enforced by some of the Brahmins, some of the brains, and that's how Hinduism actually declined. But this is coming out of free market, this is coming out of open market philosophy. In an open market, some people will do better, some people will not do better. So what are you going to do with these people? You have to employ them somewhere, but those environments may not be suitable for practicing knowledge. This is where this entire notion of caste system coming along. Again, this idea of sacredness have been completely missed by the so-called enlightened philosophers. You cannot show me one philosopher who actually pointed out these very fundamental, these very key element of civilization, sacredness. So this knowledge, the idea is that if you cannot maintain sacredness, this knowledge can be a very, very, very dangerous tool. Because guess what? We human beings, we receive suggestions from the environment. What is human psychology? Human psychology is constantly getting suggestion. Our brain is constantly getting suggestion from the environment. So if the environment is not maintained properly, guess what this guy is gonna do? We will create bad thoughts, evil thoughts. And thoughts are matters. If you cannot maintain the proper environment, this environment will send suggestion, and that suggestion will translate into thought, and that thought will translate into action. You see the problem. This is why this preparation for knowledge, aka environment, is very, very key in our understanding of civilization. Again, which have been completely missed. That knowledge is sacred, these notions have been completely missed by the so-called Western enlightened philosophers. So how do you create a peaceful society? You have to include temple into the state. Right now, what do we have? We have the separation of church and state under secularism. Again, we will talk about this secularism in the next episode as well. But the problem is, this is the idea to destroy civilization. When you separate sacredness from the environment, you create evil. These ideas have been completely missed by the so-called enlightened philosophers. So what is the highest potential that a human being can achieve? This is what we are going to discuss. But before that, let's do a quick recap. So far, we talked about the sacredness of knowledge and also the preparation for knowledge. And as part of this preparation for knowledge, that is environment, we talked about the roadblock. That what is the roadblock that will hold you back from reaching your full potential? We mentioned that collectivism can surely be a roadblock. You have to uphold individualism, and as such, collectivism can come as a roadblock. To put it the other way, caste system cannot be a notion for collectivism. Just because someone is born as a Dalit doesn't mean he cannot be Swami Vivekananda. Just because someone is born as a Sudra doesn't mean he cannot be a Yogi. And also the fact that just because someone is born as a Dalit doesn't mean a Brahmin cannot teach him. Ramakrishna Paramahansa, who was the intellectual master of Swami Vivekananda. And as Vivekananda puts it, caste system is always fluid. It is not hereditary, it is fluid. It is moving. It is an idea of open market economy. It is not a notion of hereditary collectivism. It's not an idea of class based on hereditary births. Just because you are born as a Dalit doesn't mean that your sons and daughters have to be barred from entering into the temple. That is not what they are saying. It is fluid. It is moving. It is changing. It is not static. It is not hereditary. It is not a notion of collectivism. Alrighty, so now let's talk about the highest potential for humanity. What does Hinduism say about this highest potential? To understand this notion, let me introduce you to yet another concept. We discussed about the sacredness of knowledge earlier, but now let's talk about the type of knowledge. You heard me right. Type of knowledge. Previously we talked about the sacredness of knowledge, yes? But right now we are going to talk about the type of knowledge. What we understand as knowledge is basically something that is within the domain of five senses. Hinduism says that there are two types of knowledge. And knowledge that falls within the five senses, within the realm of physical world, and then there is yet another type of knowledge that goes beyond the physical world, that goes beyond five senses. What is science? Science is the study of physical law. It is by definition physical, within the domain of five senses. But what Indian philosophers said that there are yet another type of knowledge that goes beyond five senses. The study of Raja Yoga. What is Raja Yoga? It's the study of non-physical phenomenon. Raja Yoga is the study of non-physical phenomenon, the phenomenon that goes beyond physical boundaries, that goes beyond five senses. This is what the Indian philosophers, for the first time in humanity, they figured out when? Some 10,000 years ago. 5 to 10,000 years, could be as high as 15,000 years. This is what they studied. Non-physical phenomenon, Raja Yoga. This is what they studied some 5 to 10,000 years ago. See, when we are told that Europeans brought civilization to humanity, can you see what level of ignorance are we talking about? What level of lunacy are we talking about? In this entire discourse of Western philosophy, not a single word exists that highlight even one bit about this study of non-physical phenomenon. Not a single word. Hindus are saying that the notion of divine vision that goes beyond five senses. The philosophy of oneness, Advaita philosophy, where does this Advaita philosophy is coming from? It is coming from the notion of divine vision. And where does this divine vision comes from? It comes from the study of Raja Yoga. It comes from the study of non-physical phenomenon. So we are told that the Europeans brought civilization. Can you see what level of nonsense, what level of lunacy are we being forced fed? Are we being shoved down our throat? Now, let's talk about two other very troublesome issues of this current model of civilization. The sheer danger of belief. What did I say? The sheer danger of belief. We talked about collectivism. And in the last episode, we dedicated an entire discussion on the notion of monotheism. Like the last episode was based on this fundamental topic. Monotheism. Again, monotheism, collectivism, belief. These ideas are linked. These ideas are tangled. You cannot separate these ideas from one another. Okay. So if you haven't watched those episodes, I highly recommend that you do before listening to what I'm about to say. Okay, so now let's shift our focus to the danger of belief. When we are talking about the civilization, okay, how do you create a peaceful society, right? That is fundamentally what we are discussing today. To create a peaceful society, we have to be very, very careful about one of the very bad elements of society, belief. And if you look at the Abrahamic philosophies, if I should call it philosophy to begin with, but if you look at the core, if you look at the center of these philosophies, what is the core? Belief. Believing something. Hinduism is saying that you have to go beyond this belief. The notion of illusion, Maya. Where does this Maya comes from? This Maya comes from this study of Raja Yoga, non-physical phenomenon. You cannot show me one document in this entire world, in this entire discourse of philosophy, knowledge, whatever it is, one document that talks about non-physical phenomenon. The science of the sciences, Raja Yoga. Divine vision, where does this philosophy of oneness, Advaita philosophy, is coming from? It's coming from the study of non-physical phenomenon. So the biggest problem, as we discussed, that what is the biggest challenge of any civilization? The biggest challenge of civilization is to bring down this notion of equality, because equality is forced. When you force equality, you bring tyranny. You go against nature. So what exactly is the danger of belief? To demonstrate my point, let's talk about the case of Islam. What is Islam? A phony victimhood sob story to abuse children. A rape cult, so to speak. Not only that it is a death cult,
Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he led what would be considered, in a sense, a war cult, a death cult, and that he spread Islam in this way.
Islam is a warrior religion in many ways, and it's unapologetically so. It's about expansion, it's about conquest and so on.
So keep fighting the Christians and Jews until they give jizya. So it's compelling them to give jizya. This shows you clearly that it's about forcing people to become Muslim.
Reason why you have to fight them is because they are Jews and Christians.
Oh, it's martyrdom. The idea of shuhada, shaheed in Islam, bro. It's the idea of shaheed is we celebrate the ones who have been killed,
Who've been martyred.
who've been martyred, bro. We celebrate.
The concept of martyrdom, then I would consider that to be an advantage, frankly. The one who's willing to commit suicide has the initiative.
but guess what else it is? It is also a child abusing rape cult. What is the story of Islam? We are told that Muhammad was persecuted. That is what we are told. Even if you take this story at its face value, that Muhammad used to stand in front of Kaaba in Mecca, he used to abuse the pagan gods and goddesses. He denounced those gods and goddesses. He used to insult those gods and goddesses. In other words, he was a troublemaker in Mecca. And that's why he was persecuted. Like, even if you take this story at its face value, Muhammad was a troublemaker. But there is more to that story. That city doesn't even exist, let alone he being persecuted. Like I mentioned about a documentary in the last episode as well. Dan Gibson made a documentary, The Sacred City. And in that documentary, he revealed that there was no such city as Mecca even existed prior to Islam. No such city existed. And also, I believe it was J. Smith, Dr. J. Smith, who also talked about something similar in some of his lectures.
I'm going to be shutting down Muhammad tonight and the Quran tonight and Mecca. And I'm going to do it all three tonight using only evidence from the 7th century. From the century where this man lived, from the century where this book supposedly was revealed, and from the century where this city existed. So bear with me, that's an awful lot to shut down, and I've got to do it in 1 hour.
So the story was that Muhammad was persecuted. And we are told that because he was persecuted in Mecca, that's why he migrated to Medina. So if he was persecuted in Mecca and then he subsequently migrated to Medina, that means the city has to exist in the first place. But guess what? The city doesn't even exist prior to Islam. A phony victimhood sob story. Right now, look at Gaza. What is Gaza? Gaza is occupied by Israel. Israel is an occupier. That is the story we are told. But there are 57 Muslim countries. Is Bangladesh a stolen land? Is Bangladesh an occupied land? Is Pakistan an occupied land? Is Afghanistan an occupied land? Bangladesh is a Hindu country. Pakistan is a Hindu country. Afghanistan is a Buddhist country. What happened to the indigenous people of all of these lands? 57 of them. These people are mostly pagans, Hindus, Buddhists, Zoroastrians, and so on. Okay. All of these indigenous people have been butchered, have been massacred. Their boys, the boys who have grown pubic hair, they have been beheaded mercilessly in the most sadistic, in the most barbaric ways possible. And how it was done? It was done with a story. A phony victimhood sob story. Babies have been bayoneted. Men have been bludgeoned to death. I am talking about just 50 years ago in 1971 in Bangladesh. Men, women and children have been burned alive. In the most sadistic, in the most barbaric ways possible, these people have been butchered, and now we are told that Israel is the occupier who are occupying Gaza, who have stolen the Palestinian land. Because Israel is occupying Gaza, that means Gaza is a stolen land, isn't it? But those 57 countries where the indigenous population have been annihilated, have been genocided, have been massacred, these are all freedom fighters. What is Hamas? Freedom fighter. You see, what is the danger of belief? And this has been done by collectivism. You see the problem? We discussed about collectivism earlier. When you have collectivism, you are forcing equality. And that is how the Abrahamic philosophies have been created. Who are the target? Who are the victims of this genocide? The males have been slaughtered, even the boys that I am talking about who have grown pubic hair. They have all been beheaded. They have been butchered. And then what happened to the women and children? Hundreds of millions of these women and children have been dragged along the mountainous terrain and sold as sex slaves in Middle Eastern countries. It's called Hindu Kush, Hindu slaughter. I am talking about India, and not just India. Transatlantic slave trade, the white European slavery by the Muslims. Millions, hundreds of millions of people have been brutalized with this phony victimhood sob story. Because see, our human mind has a mechanism. It has a justice mechanism. What do you want? You want justice. Because Muhammad was persecuted, that means his followers now have to seek justice. But guess what? The story is complete lie. The city doesn't even exist, let alone he being persecuted. The city doesn't even exist. So a story was manufactured, a victimhood story was manufactured, and then a literature was written filled with hatred, Holy Quran, so that the followers, the believers can seek justice for the persecution of the Prophet. And you have the manual right in front of you. How are you going to seek justice? By slaughtering, butchering, murdering them the way you like. This is what is going on for the last 1400 years. And who have been victimized? Mostly women and children. Women and children, unarmed, innocent civilians, they have been the soft target of this medieval barbarism. This is the danger when you have belief in the society. What Hinduism says? Hinduism says that you have to go beyond these five senses. You have to reach this divine vision, Advaita philosophy. And what does Islam say? That there is no God but Allah. Hinduism saying that everything is God, and Muslims are saying that there is no God but Allah. You see the difference? This is the danger of a story. And with this phony victimhood sob story, hundreds of millions of people have been butchered, and still this genocide is continuing. Still it is going on. Now, those Christians who are listening to this, I also have a very bad news for you. We talked about the phony victimhood sob story. Your story is not much different, by the way. Jesus was a Jew, and guess what? He was murdered by the Jews. He was murdered by the Jews. Once again, a phony victimhood sob story. But it has a little bit of a deviance. If I accept that Jesus existed, if I do accept that Jesus existed, then it has a little bit of deviance. Jesus died for the sins of humanity, and not just he died, but he was also resurrected. So he was not entirely massacred, as was the case of Muhammad. Like, how did Christianity evolve in the last, at least for the last 200 years? One possible explanation can be, I'm not saying that I am right, correct me if I am wrong. One possible explanation can be that it deviated from this victimhood narrative. What is the case of Islam? It's a phony victimhood story. But for the case of Christianity, this victimhood story even slightly shifted. I'm not saying that it will not come back. The persecution that has happened, many pogroms that Jews suffered, I'm not saying that it's not going to rear its ugly head again. Like in the case of Second World War, 1938, when the Jews were, hunted down all over Europe. Some people will say that this is coming from that narrative of victimhood. Jesus was murdered by the Jews, and that's why Christians are now avenging. Christians are now taking revenge for the murder of Jesus by the Jews. And these things can definitely rise its ugly head, because again, it is all about human psychology. Human psychology is about seeking justice. When you have a story, a victimhood story, the victimhood story has an ingrained notion of seeking justice. I'm not saying that Hitler did it just because he wanted to avenge the blood of Jesus. That is not what I'm saying, but it could be. It could be the reason as to why he did what he did in Second World War. So there are crocodiles, there are sharks lurking under the water. You may not see it, but Christianity has definitely evolved. Over the last 200 years at least, the violence in the Christian world has declined quite a bit. But for Islam, I don't see any hope. Because it's coming from this victimhood story. What is the fundamental problem? People who are saying that, oh look, we need to do reform, we need to do this, we need to do that. But what is the problem with Islam? The problem with Islam is the story. It has a story that seeks justice, that claims eye for an eye. This is the main problem of Islam as I see it. And that is why Islam has not moved even one bit for over the last 1500 years. But for the Christians, luckily for the Jews, that story has shifted. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. This story has shifted. It has its different angle. Jesus died for the sins of humanity. And not only that he died, but he was also resurrected. So you don't have to seek justice until the day of resurrection. as is the case for the Muslims. This is the danger of a story. And now, as we are talking about the danger, let's talk about the women. How these women and children have been brutalized. Like if you look at Islam, what is the view of women in Islam? Its entire view towards women is this, that women is evil. What is the view of women? Women is evil. Have you ever wondered, I'm talking about both of you, if you are a Christian or a Muslim, have you ever wondered why there is no female goddess in your theology? If you think about Hinduism, goddess, what is goddess? Is just as equivalent as God. Female form, a feminine form, but it is equal, it is equivalent to the female. To the male. A female is equal to the male. You need money, you have the goddess Lakshmi. You need knowledge, you have the goddess Sarvasati. For might, you have Durga, and so on. Okay? For might, for money, for power, for wealth, you have female deities just as much you have the male deities. The Rama, the Vishnu, the Krishnas, and all those things. But if you look at Abrahamic philosophies, is the father and son, master and slave. A question can be asked whether these Christianity have been popularized among the Roman slaves with the notion of this master and slave, father and son hierarchy. Is there a possibility that a story have been created to popularize Christianity among the slaves of Rome? Among the Roman slaves, Christianity have been popularized with the notion of master and slave, father and son. Again, there are problems with Christianity we will discuss in a separate episode, in a separate day. But can you see that there are some parallels, at the very least? Whether Christianity have been popularized with this kind of notion, with the notion of master and slave, father and son, why there is no female deity? There is another explanation that is even more sinister. Whether men have created these ideologies to abuse women. We talked about popularizing the idea, Christianity, father and son, master and slave. That is just part of it. The other half is whether some men have created these ideas, have created these religions to abuse women. Think about your sexual energy. What happens when you are at the peak of your sexual urge? You know, like there is the raw energy that overpowers you. Sexual energy I'm talking about. So you want to crush something, you want to subdue someone. Okay. Now, if it is their women, you can do whatever you like. What is Abrahamic philosophy? Is us versus them. Who is their women? It is the women of the infidel. You can do whatever you like. You see the problem? To abuse women. Islam, slaughter the man, even if they were boys who have grown pubic hair, you slaughter them. And what happens to the women and children? You can now abuse them because it is their women. Witch hunting, hundreds of millions of women, maybe not hundreds of millions, but definitely millions of women have been burned at stakes. Witch hunting. I'm talking about Christianity. Millions of women have been abused, have been dragged through the mountainous terrains into the slave market in the Middle East by the Muslims because they were their women. They were heretics. They can be abused the way you want. Have the man created these ideologies to abuse women? Because women have been seen as evil. But to understand this evil being outside of you, evil being them, Can you see that there is a problem? When you have this us and them, who becomes the casualty of this us and them? Women. Women can be abused because it is their women. To say that the Europeans brought civilization, this is far from the truth. See, there are lots of questions. There are lots of historical events that we are unable to decipher. Why all of these things happened? If humanity had reached such a level 10,000 years ago, what exactly happened behind this decline? One thing I can tell you is this: the last known civilization, the last known, is the civilization of Bharat. It's not that the European Renaissance, it's not European Renaissance that brought civilization, not at all. You might have heard it from your childhood, but these are ignorant perspective. These are not truth at all. These are miles, thousands of years behind what a true civilization really means. And the true civilization, as I understand, it came out of Bharat. European Renaissance is not the dawn of civilization, my friend. Not at all. It's far from the truth. My worst fear is, see, what Indian philosophers, what they achieved some 10,000 years ago, you might as well be another 10,000 years behind. Swami Vivekananda, what did he say about this Western philosophy? Is baby's talk. That is what my intellectual master, Swami Vivekananda, said about the Western philosophy. With all due respect to my intellectual master, guess what I am gonna say? Garbage. Junk. Western philosophy is nothing but junk. That's what it is. And if you are unable to swallow this fact, if you are unable to protect even the most vulnerable in the community, who is the most vulnerable? Those women and children. It is their women, it is their children. This is the very essence of evil. To think that a child who is born yesterday is their child and can be butchered, can be abused in any way, shape or form. This is, my friend, the very essence of evil. Very essence of evil. When you cannot protect your child, when you cannot protect the most vulnerable in the community, you have no business talking about civilization. Again, we will talk about the elephant in the room on a separate episode. There are lots of other problems. It is coming. I am not done yet. But as you can see, there are loads of problems with your doctrine. Loads of problems. So in this episode, we talked about caste system. We talked about the notion of inequality, the notion of discrimination. But there is yet another notion before we move on to the next episode where we will talk about democracy, because democracy is about equality. Again, we will see all three components of democracy are completely flawed. But before we talk about democracy, I want to talk a certain aspect of this democracy, which is self-defense. This is a notion that comes out of democracy. Under democracy, you are allowed to self-defense. And self-defense, as we all know, can actually lead to wars. So how do you uphold civilization? That was the proposition that who showed humanity as to how to uphold civilization? I said it is Krishna. Now obviously there are a couple of things, like if you talk about yoga, if you talk about caste system, these are also part of this discrimination, the notion of inequality. But when we are talking about upholding civilization, we are talking about waging wars. I want to highlight this point because guess what? These are nuanced understanding that I want to clarify, okay? So are we talking about the same thing, like when under democracy you are supposed to self-defense, which can lead to war. And also, we are saying, like I am saying, that to uphold civilization, you have to wage war. Krishna's message. So are we talking about the same thing? No. When we are talking about wars, self-defense can definitely lead to wars, but these are not the same thing. Let me explain. First, let's talk about self-defense. What is self-defense? Self-defense is basically a reactionary approach. It is a reactionary approach. Something will happen, and based on that something, you will react. Even then, you may not be able to react. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, right now, we have all these pro-Palestinian rallies being held all over the world. And what is happening in these rallies? People are chanting, "River to the sea, Palestine will be free." That's a call for genocide on October the 8th in Opera House. Jews. These are call for genocide. What did the democracy do about it? Nothing. Not just in Australia or in the US or in London. All over the world, people are chanting for caliphate in Germany. What German government is doing about it? Nothing. The question is why? See, under democracy, your default position is this. Your default position is equality. You signed up to give them the freedom to chant those slogans. What is your default position? Your default position is equality. That's your default position. So when they're chanting those things, like you already decided that good and bad, these are equal. A good culture and a bad culture, like what is democracy? Is cultural communism. Okay. So you already decided that those cultures, they're all equal. So when you are trying to take an action against a particular culture, guess what you are doing? You are contradicting yourself. Your default position is equality. This is where these problems are coming from. So right now, even if you see that these people are chanting, these people are praising, they are mourning the death of the terrorists, all the democratic countries got nothing else to do other than being a spectator to all this nonsense. What is your default position? Your default position is that all cultures are equal. Democracy is cultural equality, cultural communism. All cultures are equal. That's your default position. So if you want to vilify a particular culture, if you want to point your finger to a particular culture by saying that, oh look, this is an inferior culture, guess what you have to do? You have to go against your own assertion. Your assertion is that everyone is equal. And now you are saying that, oh look, this group is not equal. Then what happens? You become an Islamophobe. It's not their fault. It is your fault. You are saying that they are all equal. That's your default position. If you have already assumed that everyone is equal, how are you going to go against your own view? That is the question. And of course, these things are not very easy to deal with. There are, of course, like human rights and all these laws and this and that. People can, come after you by saying that, oh, you vilified me. They can, sue you and all these things. So a lot of people, even the government officials, they're very scared. Again, all of these things are coming from your assertion. Your initial assertion, your baseline assertion is that everyone is equal. Because you said so, that's why now you cannot take it back. There are laws to protect those values. Not only you have to go against the law, which will end up in a huge legal battle, understandably. And even if you succeed, how do you implement these values? Because that's not how the society works. You will be singled out by all the other democracies for implementing such a value. For saying that, oh look, these people are not equal. So not only you are allowing a disease to grow, like what is exactly happening? Because let's say, for instance, that you understand, oh look, there is a problem. But because of all of these things, you cannot do anything against it. So you are allowing a problem to grow bigger. If you have a disease, what do? You cure the disease. But because your default position is equality, you are allowing a problem to grow bigger. You are allowing a disease to grow bigger. That's problem number one. And the second problem is, under democracy, yes, we understand that we can self-defend. Under democracy, under self-defense, you are supposed to defend yourself. You are supposed to wage wars. But that is if you are able. What if you are unable? Ask the Hindus in Bangladesh, for instance. Ask the Christians in Middle East or in Africa. How are they defending themselves? How democracy is helping them to defend themselves? The Jews are able to defend themselves, and even then they are facing constant criticism from all over the world. But what about those people who cannot defend themselves? What about them? How democracy served the minorities who are living under Islamic supremacy in those countries? Have democracies served in any of these cases the interest of the minorities? No. In 1938, when the Jews faced pogrom, have democracies served their purpose? Now they can defend themselves. That's a different issue. Although under democracy, under self-defense, you are supposed to defend yourself. But are you able to defend yourself? Not a single democracy is upholding the values of minorities in all these countries where they are living as a minority under Islamic rule. So although under self-defense, you are supposed to defend yourself, but there are some very serious problems. In 1938, when Jews couldn't defend themselves, we saw what has happened. They have been subjected to a genocide. Nowadays, of course, they can defend themselves, but then again, you see how they are being haunted, how they are being hounded, how they are being howled at by all these so-called democracies. Not Afghanistan or Pakistan. There, people are shouting, chanting. Forget about them. All these so-called democracies, they are coming after a country who is trying to defend itself. It is not that they waged war on October the 7th. It was the other way around. But now that they are trying to defend themselves, all the other nations are coming after them. So the self-defense, this notion has its own problem. As I just explained, it cannot guarantee safety, like it certainly cannot guarantee safety. It can talk about self-defense, but how the minorities are defending themselves. First of all, you are allowing a problem to grow, calling the good and bad as equal. That's the bigger problem. And the consequences. Right now, all over the Western world, this problem is growing bigger. What are you exactly doing about it? Let's say, for instance, with all these pro-Palestinian rallies, if there is an incident taking place somewhere, let's say, for instance, in London, just a couple of days ago, there was an incident in Amsterdam. Jews are being chased. What could they do? How could they defend themselves? They ended up in hospital. These are democracy. There are lots of this kind of anti-Semitic violence or violence against any minority, whether it's Hindus or Christians, whatever it is. They are being subjected to this violence every single day in many parts of the world. How democracy is actually protecting their interest? It isn't protecting their interest. Still, in some parts, non-Muslims like the Christians and Buddhists and whatnot, they are the majority. What happens when they become minority, like I believe it's happening in London? You are allowing a problem to grow. Right now, you can defend yourself. But for how long? Look at Kashmir. Because you are allowing a problem to grow, if that problems grow bigger and bigger and bigger, how long will you be able to defend yourself, like practically? I understand, like the second notion, you are allowed to defend yourself. Fair enough. But if that problem goes bigger, goes out of your control, how will you be able to defend yourself? You are allowing a problem to grow in the first place, which shouldn't be the case, but you are doing it anyway because you thought everyone is equal. You brought everyone under the same umbrella. That's a problem number one. And the second problem is, under democracy, you are allowed to self-defend, but are you able to self-defend? So these are the problems that cannot be dealt with democracy. Now, in contrast, if you think about Hinduism, like let me give you one example. Let's say, for instance, Again, please do not quote me about the dates, times, and all those things. Like when the Somnath temple was attacked, I'm talking about India, like, these barbarians, these savages, they came and destroyed some 40,000 temples. So one of these temples was Somnath temple, a magnificent temple. So when that temple was invaded by these savages, some 50,000 inhabitants, like these are villages, these are not battle-hard soldiers or anything. They knew that they're gonna die. Nonetheless, they went to protect their deity. They went to protect the temple. They knew that they're gonna die. They are not talking about, like, they are certainly not defending themselves. If you want to talk about defending yourself, you might as well go find a place to, hide, to do an ambush and stuff like that. But that is not the case. They are standing in front of the temple, waiting for the invaders to come and attack them. They are ready to die. They are willing to sacrifice their life. Why is it so? And this is not just one-off case. Like, there are many, many, many cases when, again, please do not quote me on the dates and times and all those things. Like the husbands, they burn their wives and children beforehand. And then they open the fortress gate and they march to their death. They knew that they're going to die. They knew. It is not about self-defense. They knew they're going to die, because if they knew that they would survive, obviously they're not going to burn their own wives and children in the first place, would they? Now, of course, they knew that they will die, and that's why they killed their sons and daughters and the wives beforehand, and then they went, because as we all know, Islam is a religion of peace. What happens to the prisoners of war? Like, you slaughter the men and then you rape their women and children and sell them as prostitutes. Like, we all know what Islam stands for. It stands for savagery and barbarism. So to escape this savagery and barbarism, what Hindus did, they burned their wives and children and then they marched on to their own death. So is self-defense and Krishna's message of waging war that even if you are small in numbers, even if you are weak, you have to take up the arms and fight to destroy the evil. The message of sacrifice, are they same? No, they are not same. So when we are talking about civilizational values, we discuss two key ideas in this episode. One, of course, is the idea of inequality. The idea of inequality. We talked about caste system. We talked about the notion of yoga. Okay, uplifting the positive energies and suppressing the negative energy, like the positive energy that is within you and the negative energy that is also within you. Okay, so these things can certainly help, but to uphold civilization, Krishna's message is waging wars, sacrifice. Alrighty. So in the next episode, we will see why all three notions of democracy, like as we will discuss the flaws of democracy in the very next episode, we will see why all these notions are completely flawed. Whether it is the notion of equality, whether it is the notion of free speech, and of course, secularism, church and state. We will see why these notions are completely and utterly flawed. Alrighty, so I'm definitely hoping to join you on the very next episode. Thank you for listening. Bye for now.